Hello, sleepy traveler. Welcome to tonight's gentle journey through time. This is Life Before Toilet Paper, a soft look at history, and it's exactly what it sounds like, a slow, soothing wander through the quiet and curious history of how people once lived before the humble roll of toilet paper ever existed. We're going to drift back into the medieval world, a time of castles, markets, chamber pots, and surprisingly inventive hygiene methods. In fact, this series is all about the small, boring parts of history that help us feel oddly calm. Because sometimes, learning about the mundane is the perfect lullaby for a restless mind. Before we begin, I'd love to know, Salam Wal, what time is it where you are, and where in the world are you watching or listening from? It's always fascinating to see how far a sleepy story can travel. Alright, get cozy, lie back, and let the soft whispers of medieval life guide you into rest. In the quiet of early medieval mornings, when the mist hung low over fields and forests, daily life began slowly. The sun rose without hurry, casting a soft light over huts thatched with straw and cottages of wattle and daub. Inside, people stirred. There was bread to bake, animals to tend, and water to fetch. But before any of that, there were personal needs to address. Toilets, as we know them now, did not exist. For the common folk, nature provided the setting for relief. The edge of a forest, a quiet patch near the stream, or behind a hedgerow served as the backdrop. These spots were often chosen for their privacy, accessibility, and distance from the home or communal well. When it came to cleaning, the options were dictated by the environment. In warmer months, broad leaves from trees like mulberry, sycamore, or chestnut were favored. They were large, flexible, and relatively smooth. People understood the textures of plants instinctively. They knew which ones to avoid: nettles, brambles, or anything with a sharp edge. In a world without manuals, this knowledge passed from observation and repetition. Moss, especially sphagnum moss, was another frequent choice. It grew abundantly in moist, shaded areas, and retained water well, making it a soft and slightly absorbent material. People gathering firewood, or herbs, might also collect a handful of moss along the way for personal use. Its feel was gentler than most leaves, and it was easy to compost or bury after use. For those living near forests, it became a natural part of the daily rhythm. In coastal or rocky regions, smooth stones rounded by rivers or sea tides were common. Chosen for their polished surfaces, they were often washed and reused. There was a certain practicality to them. Stones could be durable, easily rinsed in running water, and returned to a dedicated place near a frequented spot. In some homes, a pile of such stones might rest near the entrance or behind a screen for private use. These were the humble beginnings of tools shaped by need. Winter, however, changed everything. Leaves fell, moss dried up or froze, and the ground grew hard. In colder months, people turned to other options. Strips of cloth, usually old or worn-out fabric, were repurposed. In wealthier homes, linen rags might be kept in baskets or wooden boxes. For peasants, anything from wool scraps to bits of sackcloth might serve the same purpose. After use, some cloths were rinsed and washed, others burned or buried. There wasn't a uniform method. What one village did might differ from another, only a few miles away. When people traveled, especially on foot, they carried simple hygiene bundles. These might include a water flask, a cloth wrap containing a handful of moss, and perhaps a carved wooden stick for general use. Simplicity ruled the day. The bundle was compact, the tools biodegradable or reusable, and the process accepted as part of life. Not everyone relieved themselves in the open. Some homesteads had what might loosely be called a latrine, little more than a wooden seat above a pit or trench. The pit was dug to a practical depth, then covered after filling and replaced elsewhere. Above it, a frame or structure might offer shelter from rain or prying eyes. Still, in most villages, privacy was more about timing than architecture. People went early or late, or simply turned their backs. Community rules emerged quietly. Paths to the usual spots were worn into grass. Some areas were unofficially marked as no-go zones, out of respect for the well, the washing area, or the footpath. These unspoken codes of conduct were surprisingly consistent across regions. No one taught them outright, but everyone learned. Children learned by following their elders. Boys and girls observed how to gather moss or check for leaf texture. They helped carry water, noticed how cloth was stored, and heard casual remarks about what was acceptable. There were no formal talks. Cleanliness was a part of rhythm, like fetching firewood or sweeping the hearth. In larger settlements, communal latrines began to emerge. These were shared by extended families, or a cluster of neighboring homes. Dug deeper, and used more often, these pits were periodically treated with ashes or straw, to cover waste and reduce smell. Still, they were earthy places, functional, not pleasant, and seldom spoken of beyond necessity. Religious customs also played a part. Monks, living in abbeys or monasteries, kept stricter habits. Their latrines, often called rederidortas, were connected to running water or streams, when possible. This wasn't for luxury, it was for cleanliness and ritual purity. Monastic orders believed in cleanliness of the body, as a form of discipline. Each abbey had its own approach, with rules about when to wash, how to clean, and where to relieve oneself. Despite their silence, monks lived by careful routines. The nobility, while better off, lived with similar challenges. Castle latrines, sometimes called garderoobes, were simple chambers that emptied outside the walls. They might be high above the ground, with waste dropping into a pit or moat. Some garderoobes had seats with wooden lids, others were little more than a hole in a bench. Cleaning was left to servants, and odor was considered an unfortunate part of castle life. Herbs like lavender or rosemary were sometimes placed nearby to freshen the air, but their effect was limited. Back in the countryside, everyday folk made peace with simplicity. They adjusted with the seasons, respected shared spaces, and turned to the natural world for help. No one questioned the absence of paper. That invention, still centuries away from common use, wasn't missed. What existed was enough. They had moss, they had cloth, they had time-tested habits passed through generations. Evening routines mirrored the morning. Before bedding down, people stepped outside or used a chamber pot if they owned one. Chamber pots were ceramic or metal bowls kept under beds or in corners. In the morning, contents were emptied discreetly. Some homes had dedicated spots for this, often behind a shed, near the pigsty, or along the edge of a field. Disposal was straightforward. Waste returned to the earth, sometimes buried, sometimes tossed where it would do no harm. It was a cycle understood without much thought. Nature accepted what humans left behind. No one thought it crude, it was life. The rhythm of hygiene was woven into daily existence. It wasn't glamorous, but it wasn't shameful. People did what they needed, quietly and routinely. If someone in the village had a new method, a different moss, a better stone, a clever way of folding cloth, it might be adopted without ceremony. Good ideas traveled softly, passed from neighbor to neighbor, without much fanfare. In the absence of plumbing, the land itself became part of the process. It offered shelter, tools, and a place to return waste. Forests were not just for hunting or foraging, they were places of privacy. Streams were not only for washing clothes, they were places to rinse cloths or clean hands. Life and landscape were intertwined. There was no written record of preferences, no journal entries detailing which moss was best, or which cloth texture felt nicer in winter. But in actions and patterns, preferences emerged. A cluster of homes might all use one glade. A family might swear by river stones while their neighbors stuck to linen strips. These differences were small, personal, and respected. Silence surrounded the act, but not out of shame. It was simply ordinary, as mundane as baking bread or stitching a tunic. No need to discuss it, no urge to innovate. Time passed slowly, and the methods endured. Generation after generation followed the same practices, adjusting slightly for weather, location, or custom. The tools were few, the knowledge was shared quietly, and the needs timeless. Even today, remnants of those early methods linger in some rural parts of the world. The use of cloth, of water, of nature's own tools, they're echoes of a past that never found need for a roll of perforated paper. And so, in this first part of our quiet story, we find ourselves walking alongside villagers, monks, peasants and lords, each finding their way, without fanfare, without embarrassment. Just people, managing one of life's constants, gently and simply, with what the world provided. Water played a central role in medieval life. Every village, town, and settlement existed in relation to a stream, river, or spring. Water gave life, sustained crops, and offered a place for washing. But over time, it became part of sanitation as well, not just for cleaning hands or clothes, but for guiding waste away. As settlements grew denser, the practice of simply relieving oneself in the open became less convenient. People began creating basic structures, initially small shelters, often no more than a few planks nailed together or a frame draped in cloth. The purpose was privacy, but eventually, these shelters took on more function. Instead of relieving oneself on the ground, pits were dug. Some were shallow, others deeper, depending on how much the spot was used and the soil type. A pit would last for some time. When full, it was covered with earth, sometimes compacted with straw or ash. Another pit would be dug a few feet away, and the process continued. Over time, people started placing wooden seats above these pits. At first, this was just a simple board with a hole cut into it. The change wasn't about comfort, it was about efficiency. A board kept one's feet out of the dirt, kept clothes cleaner, and provided a surface that could be wiped or cleaned more easily. These setups became known as privies. They were separate from the main house, often located toward the back of the property, near the edge of a garden or field. The smell made it necessary to keep some distance. In rural areas, wind and open air helped disperse the odor. In towns, people added vents or holes in the walls. There were no plans, no architects, just repetition. One family copied another. One hamlet mimicked its neighbor. Over decades, styles emerged. Privies were most often made of wood, cheap, available, and easy to work with. A small shed, big enough for one person, with a slanted roof and a narrow door. Inside, a single bench with a hole, sometimes two, if the family was large. A bucket of ash might sit nearby, used to cover waste and reduce odor. The ash came from the hearth and was considered a natural disinfectant. In colder months, a handful of hay or straw might be tossed in to keep things from freezing solid. In places where water flowed close to a dwelling, more complex arrangements started to appear. A channel might be dug to guide water beneath or away from the privy. If the stream was shallow, waste would be carried off slowly, diluted by constant flow. This was not true plumbing, but the beginning of it, a primitive understanding that running water could take things away. Monasteries were early adopters of these systems. Built with stone and supported by careful planning, some monasteries constructed reredotas, long communal latrines with chutes or shafts that dropped waste into water channels below. The idea was borrowed from Roman ruins and adapted to local materials. The monks used these spaces with discipline, cleaning them regularly and designing them to minimize foul air. Outside monasteries, some wealthier townsfolk experimented with privies that extended over streams. The seat would be built on a platform, sometimes supported by posts driven into the stream bed. Waste dropped directly into the water below. It wasn't elegant, but it worked. These designs required constant maintenance. Rain might flood the structure, freezing weather could crack boards, and if the stream dried up in summer, the whole system failed. Still, they marked progress. In marketplaces and town centers, public privies began to appear. These were rare at first, and often simple rows of wooden stalls over a shared trench. A bucket of lime or ash was kept nearby. Towns employed workers, called gong farmers or night soil men, who were responsible for emptying the waste pits at night. It was dangerous, smelly work, but essential for health and order. These workers became part of the urban rhythm, doing their jobs before dawn, unseen by most. In villages, families maintained their own privies. Children helped keep the area clean, sweeping out straw or wiping down the bench. Older members of the household reminded younger ones to toss ash in after use. The routine was understood, but not often discussed. It wasn't secret, it was simply ordinary. As wooden seats became common, a few modifications developed. Some were hinged, allowing them to be lifted for cleaning. Others had small shelves nearby, for cloths, herbs, or candles. In some homes, a small window let in light. People spent little time inside, but enough that these small touches made the space less unpleasant. Waste management varied by region. In drier areas, where water was less available, waste might be composted into garden pits. Straw, hay, and ash helped neutralize smell and added dry matter to the mix. Over time, these compost piles became useful for fertilizing fields, especially after a long resting period. This practice wasn't universal, but where it took hold, it offered a sustainable cycle. Houses in wetter regions took a different approach. If rainfall was common, pits filled quickly and had to be relocated often. Some families dug narrow ditches downhill from their homes, guiding waste away from living areas. The ditches were shallow and often disguised with stones or covered with grass. They were informal systems, built from experience, not design. In cities, where space was limited, privies were often located behind tenements. One small structure might serve several families. These communal setups were difficult to maintain. Without regular cleaning, the pits overflowed, drawing flies and causing illness. City officials eventually issued ordinances, early public health laws, that required homeowners to maintain privy spaces or face fines. Enforcement varied, but the intent showed an evolving understanding of sanitation. Over generations, the privy became standard. It was no longer an invention, but a feature, expected, maintained, improved upon slowly. The wooden seat, once a luxury, became common even among modest households. Some were polished smooth with use, others were repaired with spare planks, their shapes slightly uneven. People adapted, seasonal challenges remained. In winter, the wood grew cold, and trips to the privy were brief. In deep snow, paths had to be shoveled, and chamber pots were used more often. In spring, pits thawed and sometimes overflowed. Summer brought flies, fall brought damp air and rot. Each season added its own challenge to the routine. Despite discomfort, there was no widespread desire for change. The privy worked. It kept waste outside the home. It gave people privacy. It used materials at hand: wood, water, ash, and earth. For centuries that was enough. Children grew up learning to use the privy as they had once learned to use moss. They were taught where to walk, what not to touch, and how to cover things properly. Girls and boys both participated in keeping the area clean. In some households, small stools were kept inside for children too small to balance on the main seat. Not all homes had space for a freestanding privy. In narrow alleyways or dense housing, chamber pots remained common. These were emptied into shared pits or ditches. Over time, as towns grew and waste accumulated, these open pits became a problem. The smell, the pests, and the health issues became harder to ignore. This led to the first organized efforts at sanitation. Some towns built larger communal latrine blocks. These were cleaned regularly, built of brick or stone, and connected to water channels. They represented early investments in public hygiene, funded by taxes or wealthy patrons. Meanwhile, in the countryside, changes came slower. Wood remained the primary building material. Streams remained the primary water source, and privies remained the quiet answer to a common need. Cultural variations emerged. In some regions, people lined their privy pits with stone or brick to prevent collapse. In others, people used baskets or containers that could be lifted and carried to distant dumping grounds. Innovations were modest and local. No grand revolution occurred. Still, across decades and borders, one constant held the seat. The simple wooden bench, cut with a hole, remained at the heart of the privy. Whether perched above a running stream, or placed over a shallow trench, the seat was the defining element. It made the process easier, safer, and cleaner. This marked a shift in mindset, from adaptation to infrastructure. The privy wasn't just a response to need, it was now part of home design. When a new cottage was built, the privy was planned from the start. When a family moved in, it was cleaned and prepared. Though humble and often ignored in stories of medieval life, the privy reflected the same care and creativity seen in kitchens or workshops. It served a vital purpose. It evolved with use, and it was built to meet real daily needs. By the later medieval period, some households added simple decorations to their privies: a carved heart in the door for ventilation, a small shelf for storing cloths or herbs, a smooth stone or wooden peg for hanging a lantern. These touches, though small, showed that the privy had become more than just a hole in the ground. It had become a part of the home. And still, every morning and evening, the same quiet rituals continued. Ash scattered, Cloth placed nearby, boards wiped clean, children reminded, doors latched, water fetched. It wasn't glamorous, and it wasn't meant to be, but it worked. For hundreds of years, the privy served its quiet role, unremarkable, reliable, and just another piece of life in a world slowly learning the value of routine and the quiet wisdom of simplicity. As medieval households settled into routines shaped by season, location, and need, certain materials began to find their way into every corner of daily life. Among them, cloth became especially valuable, not only for clothing or bedding, but for hygiene as well. Long before the existence of disposable products, people turned to what they had on hand: worn-out garments, surplus linens, and leftover scraps. In homes with a bit more wealth, where cloth was more available, old linen sheets, frayed tunics, and damaged undershirts were set aside for reuse. These cloths, once retired from service in the wardrobe, were torn into strips, folded, and placed in small wooden boxes or baskets. They were tucked away near the chamber pot, by the privy, or beneath a bed. Their new purpose was unspoken, but universally understood. Linen was favored for its softness and durability. Unlike coarse wool or heavy canvas, linen absorbed without irritation and could be washed many times before falling apart. People did not cut the cloth into small squares, but instead used long, narrow strips. These could be folded to suit the task and were less likely to slip or tear. After use, they were either washed and reused or burned, depending on the condition and the preferences of the household. In castles where textiles were more abundant, cloth-based hygiene was part of a broader domestic system. Castles had large stores of linen for bedding, tablecloths, and towels. When these items wore out, they were downgraded in purpose. Soft rags might be placed in garderobes, while heavier cloths were used for cleaning stone floors or scrubbing rough surfaces. Nothing went to waste. A single linen tunic might live a dozen lives before it disappeared entirely. The people tasked with managing cloth supplies were often stewards or housekeepers. They tracked fabric inventories, sorted out items too thin for repair, and assigned scraps for secondary uses. Washing cloths was the job of washerwomen, who worked near rivers or in large wooden tubs heated by fire. These women handled all forms of household laundry, including cloths used for personal cleaning. Washing was labor-intensive. Water had to be carried, heated, and stirred with lye or soapwort. Cloths were beaten, rinsed, and hung to dry. Privacy remained important. While no one was ashamed of using cloth, it wasn't a topic of conversation. Cloths were washed discreetly and stored in simple containers. Servants changed them out regularly in wealthier homes. In smaller households, the task rotated among family members. Not all cloths were used for wiping. Some were used to wrap the hand, creating a soft barrier between skin and rougher materials like sticks or smooth stones. This practice was particularly common during travel, when carrying clean cloth was easier than depending on unpredictable natural materials. A traveler's bundle might contain a small square of wool for padding, a strip of linen for cleaning, and a small bag of ashes for disinfecting. These bundles were kept in satchels, hung from belts, or stored with other daily items. Among the nobility, personal attendants were responsible for preparing these items. Ladies in waiting might stock a noble woman's chamber with clean cloths, scented with herbs or dried flowers. Lavender, thyme, and mint were popular additions. Cloths could be stored in carved chests, alongside sachets of dried rosemary, or placed inside leather pouches sewn with decorative thread. The purpose was still basic hygiene, but the care given to the presentation reflected the status of the owner. For noblemen, attendants performed similar tasks. A squire might ensure that cloths were folded neatly in a traveling trunk, or kept near the garderobe. After a long day of riding or combat practice, knights often took advantage of warm water and cloths to clean themselves. The ritual wasn't ceremonial, just part of the day's unwinding. It was practical. It was expected. In monasteries, cloths were often shared but carefully managed. Monks led simple lives, but they were disciplined about cleanliness. Cloths used for bodily hygiene were marked discreetly and laundered apart from clothing. In infirmaries, where monks cared for the sick or elderly, special cloths were kept at hand and burned after use. The Benedictine rule emphasized cleanliness, not for comfort but for order. Even the smallest cloth had a place, a purpose, and a process. Villagers, too, used cloth when they could. A family might have 1 or 2 designated rags kept near the chamber pot, rinsed in a bucket after each use and hung to dry behind the house. The cloths might be made from old skirts, worn breeches, or torn pillowcases. They were rougher than castle linens but still preferable to moss in colder months. In winter, when snow covered the ground and plants became brittle or inaccessible, cloth took on greater importance. It didn't freeze like water or stick like wet leaves. It was warm enough to hold in the hand and could be dried near the hearth. Families anticipated the change in season by setting aside cloth in autumn. They might fold them into bundles, wrap them in parchment, or store them in jars to keep mice out. Cloth became a winter essential. Some families reused cloth until it began to fray. At that point, it might be used for other tasks, cleaning cooking pots, wiping tools, or stuffing gaps in walls against the wind. When no longer fit for any task, it was burned in the hearth. The fire consumed it without waste. The ashes might even be used to clean other cloths. It was a quiet circular system. In cities, the presence of cloth created opportunities for trade. Vendors sometimes sold bundles of scrap fabric, cut from worn garments or tailors' leftovers. These were used by the poor for patching clothing, but also for hygiene. A market stall might display small rolls of linen tied with string, sold cheaply to households without access to servants or land to gather moss. Over time, people came to expect these goods at certain stalls or times of year. Tailors, too, understood the secondary value of their trimmings. Cloth too small to sew might be gathered into bags and sold by weight. Nothing was thrown away if it could be used again. Fabric was precious. It took time and labor to make, from growing flax or shearing sheep to spinning, weaving, and finishing. Reusing it was not a sign of poverty. It was common sense. Children helped sort cloth. They learned to distinguish between linen and wool by feel. They helped hang cloth to dry, shook out the ashes from used pieces, and watched as the family prepared for winter by stacking bundles in corners or under benches. Like all other parts of hygiene, it became instinctive over time. In the absence of plumbing or disposable paper, these cloths served an essential role. They provided a layer of cleanliness in an otherwise messy world. They could be warmed near the fire, scented with herbs, or rinsed in vinegar. They helped maintain dignity and ease. There were, of course, drawbacks. Cloths required cleaning, and cleaning required time, water, and effort. In times of drought, households rationed water. In times of sickness, cloths carried risk. Some households burned all cloths used by the ill, believing that sickness could cling to fabric. Others boiled cloths in lye water, hoping to cleanse them completely. In busy households, managing cloth was constant. A mother might spend part of each day inspecting fabric, discarding thin pieces, cutting new strips, and washing what had been used. In noble houses, this task fell to maids or assistants, but the pattern was the same. Use, clean, reuse, replace. There were no standard shapes or sizes. Some cloths were square, some rectangular, some long and narrow. Each family developed their own system, based on what was comfortable, efficient, and available. Cloths could be plain or patterned, depending on their original source. Some bore the faded prints of old gowns, others showed stitching from garments taken apart. Their history was visible, though their purpose had changed. As with other aspects of hygiene, this practice was rarely written about. It existed in the space between chores, in the quiet work of hands folding, scrubbing, and hanging. No laws governed it, no sermons addressed it. It was simply what people did. Among travelers, cloth remained indispensable. It could be reused, cleaned in streams, hung to dry over a bush, or tucked inside a pack. Traders crossing long distances carried strips of cloth alongside dried food, waxed leather, and bits of soap. Soldiers carried cloth for wounds, for wiping hands, for personal use. Cloth was always present. The presence of cloth in hygiene marked a subtle shift in expectation. It was no longer enough to use what nature provided. People had begun to shape their environment, to choose softness, to reuse materials, to organize their spaces. The move from leaf to linen was not dramatic, but it reflected something larger, a quiet desire for consistency, a preference for care. By the end of the medieval period, cloth use had become standard across much of Europe. Even in modest homes, some form of cloth was reserved for hygiene. It was no longer surprising to find a bundle of rags in a wooden chest, or a folded cloth beside a chamber pot. It had become part of life. The cloth itself left no record. Worn, washed and burned, it disappeared without trace. But its role remained. It softened the harshness of the world. It connected the practical to the personal. It answered a daily need with simple materials. In a world without paper, the cloth was enough. Before cloth became common, people relied heavily on what nature provided directly around them. Moss, hay, leaves, grass, and other plants served as the primary materials for personal cleansing and hygiene. These materials were accessible, renewable, and depending on the season and region, often the only option available. Moss was especially prized in damp, forested areas. Its softness, absorbency, and availability made it a natural choice. In the cool, shaded woods of northern Europe, thick mats of moss grew abundantly on rocks, tree bases, and forest floors. People learned to identify the cleanest patches, avoiding moss near water or animal trails. When preparing moss for use, it was carefully gathered and dried if possible. Fresh moss was sometimes too wet and cold, but if dried in the sun or near a fire, it became softer and warmer. Dried moss could be stored for weeks, ready for use when needed. In winter, dried moss was particularly valuable because it did not freeze or harden like wet leaves or grass. Gathering moss was a task often assigned to children or servants. It required a gentle hand to avoid picking moss that was dirty or full of insects. People would shake out debris and dirt before bringing moss indoors. Some families kept small baskets or cloth bags, specifically for storing gathered moss. Hay was another common resource, especially in agricultural communities. While primarily used as animal fodder or bedding, hay was occasionally collected for hygiene when softer materials were scarce. Hay was coarse compared to moss but had the advantage of being plentiful and dry during harvest seasons. When hay was used, it was usually first crushed or patted down to remove sharp stalks. Sometimes straw, the leftover stalks after grain harvest, was preferred because it was finer. Straw was gathered and stored inside barns or lofts, away from moisture and pests. Leaves played a significant role as well. Large leaves from plants such as dock, burdock, or cabbage were favored for their broad surface area and soft texture. Dock leaves in particular were common because they grew in many regions and were relatively smooth. Leaves were harvested fresh, often folded or softened by repeated handling before use. Grass was less favored because it tended to be coarse and would dry quickly, becoming brittle and uncomfortable. However, in times of necessity, long blades of grass, especially from sedges or rushes growing near streams, were folded and used. The choice of plant material varied by region. In warmer climates, people had access to a wider variety of herbs and soft leaves. Mediterranean populations often used olive leaves, soft herbs like rosemary, or fig leaves. In northern regions, fir needles and pine branches sometimes supplemented moss and leaves, providing a fragrant, slightly antiseptic option. People often combined materials. A handful of moss might be wrapped in a large leaf for easier handling or to provide a barrier between the hand and the moss. Similarly, hay might be softened by layering it between cloth or leaves. This layering helped improve comfort and absorbency. In households where privacy allowed, these materials were kept inside the home or near the privy. In simpler homes, moss and leaves were stored in baskets or wooden boxes. Often these containers were lined with cloth or straw to keep the materials clean and dry. Natural materials were sometimes scented or treated with herbs. People placed dried lavender, thyme or rosemary alongside moss baskets to help with smell and to provide mild antiseptic properties. This practice was especially common in monasteries and noble households where the use of herbs was better understood. Harvesting and preparing these natural materials was a seasonal activity. In spring and summer, Families gathered moss and leaves to dry and store for the colder months. Autumn was a time to prepare hay and straw after harvest. Winter presented challenges. Snow-covered ground limited access to fresh moss or leaves, so dried reserves were crucial. Children learned from a young age how to recognize the best moss and leaves. They watched adults closely, understanding which spots in the forest or field provided clean, soft materials. This knowledge was passed down quietly, through observation and practice. The use of natural materials required patience and care. Moss had to be kept dry to avoid mold. Leaves had to be fresh to prevent brittleness. Hay and straw needed protection from moisture and pests. This meant homes often had dedicated storage spaces, small cupboards or shelves specifically for hygiene supplies. When used, these materials served more than a single purpose. People wiped themselves clean, but moss and leaves also soothed irritated skin and absorbed moisture. Some plants, like certain mosses and herbs, had mild antiseptic qualities, helping reduce infection risk. In rural communities, it was common to have communal knowledge about which plants worked best. Elders might advise younger family members or neighbors on harvesting times and proper use. Folk remedies sometimes accompanied hygiene practices, using plants to ease discomfort or prevent rash. The physical act of cleaning with natural materials was careful and deliberate. People folded moss or leaves, wiped gently, and often repeated the process to ensure cleanliness. The soft texture of moss was preferred for sensitive skin, while leaves could offer a sturdier option when needed. During travel, carrying moss or leaves was impractical. Travelers relied on cloth as previously mentioned, or on finding suitable materials along their route. When camped in forested areas, moss was collected fresh each day. This required some skill and time, but was worth the effort for comfort and cleanliness. Despite their utility, natural materials had limitations. They were perishable and had to be replaced frequently. In damp conditions, moss could become slimy or sour-smelling. Leaves could tear or dry out too quickly. Hay and straw, if not properly stored, attracted insects or rodents. These challenges meant people remained vigilant. They checked supplies regularly, replaced spoiled materials, and adjusted usage based on weather and availability. The importance of these materials was understood. They were the foundation of daily hygiene for many. In urban settings, natural materials were less common inside homes due to limited space and access. However, vendors in markets occasionally sold bundles of moss or dried herbs. Some city residents kept small containers of moss near their chamber pots, supplemented with cloth when possible. Natural materials also played a role in waste management. Ash, often gathered from hearth fires, was mixed with moss or leaves to help cover waste in privies or pits. This mixture helped reduce odors and deter flies. Ash was considered an essential part of sanitation alongside plant materials. In monasteries and convents, the care of natural materials was part of communal work. Nuns and monks collected moss and herbs during walks, stored them carefully, and used them in infirmaries. The knowledge of plant properties was preserved in herbal manuscripts and passed down through generations. The practice of using natural materials persisted well into the later medieval period. Even as cloth became more available, moss, leaves, and hay remained essential in many households, especially among the poor or those living in rural areas. These materials were a direct link to the environment, part of the rhythm of the land and the seasons. Their use reflected a deep understanding of nature's resources, a quiet adaptation that shaped everyday life. Though simple and often overlooked, the use of moss, hay, and leaves was central to medieval hygiene. It allowed people to care for themselves with what was at hand, balancing comfort and necessity. And so for many centuries, this blend of natural materials, soft moss, broad leaves, and dry hay, offered a humble but effective solution, quietly supporting the routines of daily life. Water has always been central to human life, and in the medieval period, it played an important role in hygiene, even if bathing was far less frequent than today. Unlike the materials we have been discussing, cloth, moss, leaves, water was a shared resource, tied to environment, infrastructure, and daily routines. Most medieval people obtained water from wells, springs, rivers, and streams. The quality and accessibility of water varied widely. Rural communities often relied on nearby springs or hand-dug wells, while towns and cities sometimes developed rudimentary aqueducts, cisterns, or public fountains. Water was carried by buckets or jugs, often made of wood, pottery, or metal. Since indoor plumbing was unknown, fetching and carrying water was part of daily life. Women and children typically performed this task, walking to the water source several times a day. Water was needed for drinking, cooking, cleaning, and hygiene. Because of the effort required, people used water sparingly and valued it highly. When it came to personal hygiene, water was most commonly used for washing hands and face, and occasionally for more thorough washing. Full body baths were rare and usually reserved for special occasions, illness, or among the wealthy who had dedicated bathhouses or private tubs. Washing facilities within homes were minimal. Most households kept a basin or wooden bowl filled with water near the fireplace or hearth. This basin was used to wash the face and hands, sometimes the feet. A cloth or sponge was used to apply the water, and it was common to have a small pitcher for pouring. In castles and manor houses, basins were often made of pottery or metal, pewter, brass, or even silver for the highest ranks. These vessels were polished and cared for, stored near sleeping chambers or in private rooms. Servants would fill and empty basins as needed. Public bathhouses were common in medieval towns. These bathhouses varied in size and sophistication. Some had heated pools or tubs, others simple wooden baths. They served as social hubs as well as places for cleaning. Bathhouse attendants managed water temperature, cleanliness, and privacy. Patrons might pay a small fee or be members of guilds or social groups. Bathhouses used a combination of water and steam to clean the body. Bathers scrubbed with cloths or brushes, sometimes with soap or herbs. After bathing, people dried off with towels, often linen or wool. Bathhouses were also places for massage and relaxation. Soap as a cleaning agent began to appear more widely during the medieval period, though it was far from universal. Early soap was made from animal fats mixed with wood ash or plant ashes to produce lye, a caustic substance that helped remove dirt and grease. Soap making was a skilled craft, often practiced by specialized artisans or within monasteries. Soap was expensive and not always trusted. Many believed it was harsh or could damage the skin. In some regions, herbal infusions or oils were preferred for cleansing instead. Those who used soap typically reserved it for washing clothes or household linens rather than for personal hygiene, especially early on. Bathing with soap increased over time, especially from the 12th century onward. Soap was made in bars or cakes, and scented with herbs like rosemary, lavender, or thyme. These soaps were sometimes kept in small wooden boxes or wrapped in cloth for storage. Washing hands before meals and after work was a common practice, supported by both health and religious customs. In churches and monasteries, washing stations with basins and taps were installed for ritual purification before prayers or meals. In homes, washing water was reused when possible. For example, water used for washing hands or face might later be poured into a chamber pot or outdoor privy to aid in cleaning waste. This recycling reflected the scarcity of water and the practical nature of medieval households. Cleaning the body with water often involved several steps. First, dry cleansing with cloths or natural materials removed the majority of dirt. Then water was applied to rinse away remaining residue. Sometimes, fragrant herbs were steeped in hot water to create aromatic rinses believed to refresh the skin and prevent infection. Feet were regularly washed, especially in muddy or dusty conditions. Removing footwear and soaking feet in water was common among travelers, laborers, and monks. This helped prevent sores and discomfort. Hair washing was less frequent but practiced using water and sometimes soap or herbal rinses. Women and men alike used combs and brushes to keep hair tidy. Hair washing was often done outdoors or in private chambers due to the volume of water required. In monasteries, water and washing took on special significance. Monks followed strict rules about cleanliness, including washing hands before meals and during certain prayers. They also practiced ritual washing, a spiritual as well as physical act. Monasteries often had access to cleaner water sources, such as springs or constructed wells. They also developed simple plumbing systems to direct water to latrines and washing areas. Some had designated washing rooms equipped with stone basins. Despite the importance of water, bathing was limited by social attitudes and practical concerns. Cold water in winter, limited privacy, and concerns about health risks led many to wash only certain parts of the body regularly. Bathing the entire body was considered a luxury or a health risk in some areas, where cold or dampness was thought to cause illness. The connection between cleanliness and health was understood to an extent, but medieval medical theories also warned against overexposure to water. Physicians recommended moderation, suggesting washing the face and hands daily, but bathing less frequently. Religious practices influenced hygiene as well. Washing was an act of purification and preparation for prayer. Washing feet, inspired by biblical stories, was performed ceremonially in churches and monasteries. The practical aspects of water use extended to cleaning clothing and household items. Laundry was done using water heated in large pots or cauldrons, with the addition of soap or ash lye. Washing clothes required multiple rinses and beating fabric to remove dirt. Clothing was washed less often than today, partly due to the effort involved and partly because frequent washing could damage delicate fabrics. People wore undergarments, such as linen shifts, which were easier to clean than outer layers. In some communities, laundry was communal. People gathered at rivers or washhouses to clean clothes together. These gatherings were social events as well as chores where news was exchanged and bonds reinforced. Water was also used in managing waste. Household waste, including human waste, was sometimes diluted with water and disposed of in pits or ditches outside the home. In towns, waste removal was a constant challenge, with water playing a role in flushing or diluting foul matter. Rainwater collection was practiced in some areas. People built simple gutters from wood or stone to channel rain into barrels or cisterns. This water was reserved for washing or cooking depending on quality. Overall, water was an invaluable resource in medieval hygiene, though its use was limited by availability, season, and social customs. The combination of water with cloth, moss, and soap formed the basis of cleaning practices. While bathing as we know it today was rare, the careful use of water to cleanse hands, face, feet, and garments contributed to health and comfort. As time passed, improvements in water supply and sanitation slowly changed daily life. Wells were deepened, cisterns expanded, and plumbing rudiments appeared in wealthier homes. Still, the fundamental reality remained: water was precious, labor-intensive to collect, and used sparingly but thoughtfully. This shaped how people washed and cared for their bodies, weaving hygiene into the rhythms of medieval life. In medieval times, dealing with human waste was an essential part of daily life, and over the centuries, people developed various methods and tools to manage it. The most common devices used indoors were chamber pots, simple containers kept close at hand to be used during the night or when going outside was inconvenient. These pots were typically made from pottery, pewter, or wood, varying in size and shape, but always practical. Families kept chamber pots under beds or in cupboards, often covered to contain odors. They were especially important during cold months, when venturing outdoors at night was uncomfortable or dangerous. Servants or family members would empty the pots regularly, usually in the morning, into designated waste areas such as cesspits, ditches, or the street gutters. In wealthier homes, chamber pots could be ornately decorated, made of fine ceramics or metals. However, their basic function remained the same. The design was usually a rounded vessel with a wide mouth, sometimes with handles for easy carrying. These pots were cleaned daily, and care was taken to avoid spills. For many, the chamber pot was an intimate household item, used primarily at night, but also during illness or when privacy was desired. The term close stool referred to a type of chamber pot disguised as a piece of furniture, a wooden box with a hinged lid and a chamber pot hidden inside. This allowed discreet use, keeping waste out of sight. When it came to disposing of the waste, the process depended greatly on location. In rural areas, waste was often emptied into nearby pits or midden heaps, sometimes dug outside the back door or garden. These waste pits were shallow holes used to collect household refuse, including human waste, food scraps, and broken objects. Once filled, they might be covered with soil and a new pit dug nearby. In towns and cities, the situation was more complicated. Streets were narrow and crowded, and proper waste disposal was a constant challenge. Many medieval towns had open drains or gutters running alongside streets to carry rainwater and waste away. Chamber pots were emptied directly into the street gutters, sometimes through small windows or openings known as garderobes, located above these drainage channels. This practice led to unsanitary conditions. Waste accumulated in streets and drains, attracting flies, rats, and foul odors. Officials periodically ordered streets to be cleaned, sometimes by scrubbing and hosing down with water, but often the task fell to poorer residents or laborers. Some towns enacted regulations requiring residents to dispose of waste responsibly, such as dumping it outside the city walls or in designated pits. Enforcement was irregular, and penalties were typically fines or public shaming. However, the general state of urban sanitation remained poor compared to modern standards. Privies or outdoor toilets were another common feature in medieval homes and communities. These were simple pits dug into the ground, often with wooden seats or benches built above. The pits collected human waste, which eventually decomposed or was emptied out. Privies were located at a distance from the main living quarters, usually in gardens or behind the house. They were constructed to minimize smell and contamination of water sources, although this was not always achieved successfully. In castles and monasteries, more sophisticated privies were developed. These sometimes included stone or wooden seats built over deep shafts or garderobes, which allowed waste to drop into a moat, cesspit, or pit below. Waste disposal systems in castles might use a chute or shaft directing refuse away from living spaces. The garderobes was a specific type of medieval toilet found in castles and larger buildings. It consisted of a small room or closet built on the outer wall, with a seat positioned over a vertical shaft. Waste dropped through the shaft into the moat, or a cesspit below. The flowing water in moats helped carry away the waste, though sometimes it caused foul smells. The design of garderobes was pragmatic, intended to remove waste from inhabited areas efficiently. However, they required maintenance to prevent blockages and foul conditions. Servants or designated workers were responsible for cleaning and emptying cesspits and removing waste from privies. The depth of cesspits varied, with some being shallow and others quite deep. These pits collected not only human waste but also household garbage. When filled pits were emptied manually, often at night to avoid public scrutiny, the waste was sometimes transported outside the town walls and dumped. In addition to privies and chamber pots, public latrines existed in some medieval towns and monastic complexes. These facilities were communal toilets, often built over running water, such as a stream or river, to aid waste removal. Public latrines were rudimentary, but effective for their time, providing a place for many people to relieve themselves in one location. Monasteries often featured the most advanced sanitation systems of the period. They had latrines connected to running water channels, ensuring constant flushing. These latrines were long benches with holes spaced apart, allowing several monks to use the facility simultaneously. Waste dropped into water channels below, which carried it away. Water flow in monastic latrines was created by diverting streams or collecting rainwater in cisterns. The maintenance of these systems was critical to prevent blockages and smells. Monks or servants cleaned latrines regularly, using brushes and water. The existence of public and communal latrines reflects an understanding of the importance of managing waste for health and hygiene. While these facilities were basic, they represented a step towards organized sanitation. The social and cultural attitudes towards waste and its disposal were complex. Waste was seen both as a natural part of life and something to be hidden or controlled. People were aware of the dangers of contamination and foul smells, but lacked the scientific knowledge we have today. Medieval cities struggled with overcrowding, which made sanitation difficult. Narrow streets and tightly packed houses left little room for waste pits or proper drainage. The accumulation of waste contributed to the spread of disease, particularly during outbreaks of plague and other illnesses. Efforts to improve sanitation included the establishment of ordinances regulating waste disposal and street cleaning. Some towns hired workers known as gong farmers or night soil collectors to remove human waste from cesspits and privies. These workers carried waste in buckets or carts, dumping it outside city limits. Despite the unpleasant nature of their work, gong farmers played a vital role in maintaining urban hygiene. Their labor helped prevent waste buildup that could cause health hazards. The disposal of animal waste such as manure from horses and livestock was also a significant concern. Streets were often littered with manure which combined with human waste created difficult living conditions. Some cities attempted to regulate the movement of animals within town limits or required owners to clean up after them. Manure was sometimes collected for use as fertilizer in fields outside the city. Waste management extended beyond human excrement to other refuse, including food scraps, broken household items and industrial waste. All these materials contributed to the waste piles found outside many medieval settlements. The knowledge of sanitation was often empirical rather than scientific. People noticed that waste attracted flies and caused bad smells, and they understood that foul air could lead to illness. This led to practices such as covering waste pits with straw or earth, using ash to reduce odor, and keeping living spaces separated from waste areas. In homes, hearth ash was commonly sprinkled into chamber pots or privies to absorb moisture and mask odors. Ash was also mixed with other waste materials to reduce smell and aid decomposition. Some medieval texts and medical writings advised on the importance of cleanliness and waste management. While these were not always followed universally, they reflect awareness among educated classes. As towns grew larger and populations increased, waste management became an ongoing challenge. The limitations of medieval infrastructure meant that many settlements struggled to keep streets clean and air fresh. In castles and noble estates, sanitation was better managed. Dedicated servants cleaned privies and cesspits, and waste disposal was more organized. Wealth and space allowed for improved facilities, including stone privies and waste pits with covers. Despite these advances, medieval sanitation was primitive by modern standards. The risk of contamination of water sources and the spread of disease was ever present. This reality shaped how people lived, worked and arranged their homes. In rural villages, the challenges were different but still significant. Waste pits and privies were dug outside the home, often near the garden or field. While space was less limited, concerns about contaminating wells and water supplies remained. Villagers relied on natural processes to break down waste over time. The use of earth, straw and ash helped manage smells and accelerated decomposition. Some communities rotated waste pits or moved them periodically to maintain hygiene. The management of waste in medieval times was thus a balance of practical solutions, environmental awareness and social norms. It was labor-intensive and often unpleasant but necessary for daily life. Understanding this aspect of medieval living helps explain many features of town planning, household design and social organization. The evolution of sanitation continued slowly over the centuries. Innovations such as improved plumbing, dedicated sewer systems and public health regulations eventually transformed waste management, but these were developments for later times. In the medieval period, the combination of chamber pots, privies, cesspits and rudimentary latrines formed the backbone of human waste management. People adapted to the realities of their environment and technology, developing methods that, while imperfect, allowed communities to function and grow. This system, centered on containment, manual disposal, and basic infrastructure, was a key part of daily life, influencing everything from household routines to urban planning. Despite the challenges and discomforts, medieval people lived with these sanitation methods as a normal part of life, just as they managed other aspects of their environment with care and resourcefulness. The management of human waste in medieval times was a constant concern, shaping behaviors, architecture, and social roles in ways often overlooked but deeply significant. It reveals a practical mindset, adapting to limitations while seeking solutions within available means. Through chamber pots, privies, cesspits and communal latrines, medieval society maintained a level of hygiene that, while rudimentary, laid groundwork for future improvements. This aspect of history offers insight into the daily lives of people long ago, connecting us to their world and their ways of meeting essential human needs. In medieval times, the experience of managing personal hygiene extended beyond waste disposal and washing with water. It also involved how people cared for their clothing and linens, which played a crucial role in daily cleanliness. Fabric maintenance was a demanding task, given the limited resources and technologies available, but it was essential for health and comfort. Clothing in the medieval period was primarily made from wool, linen, and for the wealthier silk. Wool was the most common material, durable and warm, but it was also prone to absorbing odors and dirt. Linen made from flax fibers was lighter and used mainly for undergarments and shirts. These linen layers were closest to the skin and therefore more frequently washed than outer garments. Washing clothes was a labor-intensive process. It began with soaking garments in water to loosen dirt, followed by scrubbing or beating them against stones or wooden surfaces. Soap, when available, was added to aid in removing grease and stains. Soap making was a skilled craft, and soap was a valuable commodity, so its use in laundry was careful and often sparing. In many communities, laundering was a communal affair. Women would gather by rivers, streams, or public washhouses, dipping clothes into the water, beating them with wooden paddles or washing boards, and rinsing thoroughly. This social aspect of laundry allowed for the exchange of news and advice, reinforcing community bonds. Once washed, clothes were wrung out to remove excess water. Drying was done by hanging garments on lines or bushes, or spreading them over fences. Sunlight was appreciated, not just for drying, but also for its natural disinfectant properties. However, bad weather could prolong drying times, complicating the task. Ironing as we know it did not exist, but smoothing garments was sometimes done by pressing with flat stones or rubbing to maintain fabric appearance. Mending was a regular necessity, since clothes were expensive and often handed down. Skilled needlework repaired tears and holes, extending garment life. The importance of undergarments, particularly linen shirts or shifts, lay in their ability to absorb sweat and dirt, protecting outer layers. These underlayers were washed more frequently than outer clothes, which might be brushed or aired instead of regularly laundered. The airing of clothes was a common practice to reduce odors and refresh fabric. Clothes were hung in sunny or breezy spots to help eliminate moisture and smells. This was especially important in colder months, when washing was less frequent. Wool garments, while hardy, were susceptible to pests such as moths and lice. To combat this, people used herbal sachets containing lavender, rosemary, or thyme, placing them among clothing to repel insects. Some also smoked fabrics, or exposed them to fresh air and sunlight. In monasteries, laundry was highly organized. Monks wore simple wool or linen habits that were regularly washed. Monastic laundries used large basins or tubs, heated water, and soap made on site. The discipline and routine of monastic life extended to hygiene and clothing care, ensuring cleanliness despite limited resources. The laundering of household linens, bed sheets, tablecloths, towels, was similarly important. These items came into frequent contact with skin and food, requiring regular cleaning. Like clothing, linens were washed in large vessels, scrubbed, rinsed, and dried with care. Beyond washing, cleanliness involved grooming and caring for the body. Hair hygiene was less frequent, but practiced with attention. Both men and women combed hair daily to remove tangles, dirt, and pests. Combs made from wood, bone, or horn were common tools, often simple but effective. Washing hair was done periodically, with water, and sometimes soap or herbal infusions. Herbs like chamomile, rosemary, and sage were used to rinse hair, impart fragrance, and possibly reduce lice. Haircuts and shaving were also part of grooming, with barbers performing these services. Beards were common among men, though styles varied by region and status. Some men shaved regularly, others let beards grow as a sign of maturity or profession. Cleanliness of the face was maintained through washing and combing. Nail care involved trimming and cleaning, usually with small knives or fingernails. Long nails were discouraged as they could harbor dirt and cause discomfort. The emphasis was on practicality and neatness, rather than elaborate manicures. Foot care was essential, especially for laborers and travelers. Feet were washed regularly to remove dirt and prevent sores. Shoes and boots were removed indoors to avoid bringing mud and filth inside, a practice that also helped preserve floors and furnishings. The removal of lice and fleas was a continual challenge. These pests were common in crowded living conditions and close quarters. Treatments included combing with fine-toothed combs, bathing, and the use of herbal remedies and smoke to deter or kill parasites. The smell was a constant concern in medieval hygiene. Without modern deodorants or perfumes, people relied on bathing, washing clothes, and using fragrant herbs to manage odors. Scented sachets, pomanders filled with spices, and herbal waters were popular among those who could afford them. Tooth care was rudimentary, but present. Chewing sticks made from aromatic woods were used to clean teeth and freshen breath. Rinsing the mouth with water or herbal infusions was common. Toothbrushes as we know them did not exist, but some employed cloths or fingers to remove debris. Diet influenced hygiene as well. Eating foods rich in spices or herbs was thought to affect bodily odors. Wine and vinegar were used both for drinking and as cleaning agents for mouth and hands. Clothing and personal care were intertwined with social and religious customs. Cleanliness was linked to purity, both physical and spiritual. Dressing neatly and maintaining appearance signaled respectability and adherence to social norms. In markets and urban centers, the trade in soap, perfumes, combs, and grooming tools supported artisans and merchants. These goods varied in quality and price, making personal care accessible to some but not all. The seasons influenced hygiene routines. In summer, when water was more plentiful, washing was more frequent, and people bathed more often. Winter brought challenges, with cold temperatures discouraging bathing and washing. Despite limitations, medieval people developed practical systems for maintaining cleanliness through clothing care and grooming. Their methods reflect an understanding of health, comfort, and social expectations. These routines connected individuals to their communities and environment, shaping daily life and personal identity. Through washing, airing, mending, grooming, and scenting, medieval people navigated the complexities of hygiene with resourcefulness and care. This dimension of medieval life reveals not only survival, but a desire for dignity and well-being, even in the face of challenges. It is a reminder that attention to cleanliness has long been a human concern, evolving with culture and technology, but rooted in everyday actions. In medieval times, water was a precious resource, essential not only for drinking and cooking, but also for maintaining personal and household hygiene. Access to clean water often determined how well people could care for themselves and their surroundings, shaping routines and health outcomes. Though medieval communities lacked modern plumbing, they developed a variety of systems to collect, store, and distribute water to meet their needs. In rural villages, most water came from wells, springs, and streams. Wells were dug by hand, often lined with stones or wood, to prevent collapse and contamination. The depth of wells varied depending on geography and water table levels. Villagers used buckets attached to ropes to draw water for drinking, cooking, washing, and watering animals. Springs where underground water naturally surfaced were prized sources of clean water. Many settlements formed near springs to ensure reliable supply. These sites sometimes became places of gathering and religious significance, with holy wells considered sources of healing or blessing. Streams and rivers were common sources but carried risks. Water from flowing sources was more likely to be fresh, but contamination from upstream waste or livestock was a concern. People used parts of rivers for washing clothes, bathing, and watering animals, while drawing drinking water from upstream locations when possible. In towns and cities, water supply was more complicated. Without centralized plumbing, residents depended on communal wells, fountains, and cisterns. These public water points were crucial gathering spots, where people collected water daily for household use. Town wells were often located in market squares or near churches, constructed with stone walls and wooden covers to protect the water. Access to wells was sometimes regulated, with towns appointing officials to maintain them and prevent contamination. Fountains supplied water through stone spouts fed by gravity from higher sources such as springs or reservoirs. These fountains were not only practical, but also decorative, often featuring carved stonework or inscriptions. Cisterns which collected and stored rainwater from roofs supplemented water supply, especially in dry periods or places without easy access to rivers or wells. These stone or wooden tanks were connected to gutters and pipes channeling rainwater into storage. Wealthier households and monasteries sometimes had private wells or cisterns within their grounds. These allowed more convenient water access and helped maintain better hygiene. Carrying water was a daily chore, often assigned to women and children. Buckets, wooden pails, and leather containers were used, and trips to the well or river could be time-consuming. The weight of water meant that transport limited the volume each household could manage. Water storage inside homes was done in large jugs or barrels, kept covered to prevent contamination. Cleanliness of storage vessels was important but difficult to maintain without regular washing and fresh water supply. Water was used in multiple ways for hygiene. Washing hands before meals was a common practice among those who could afford it. Basins filled with water stood near dining areas or in chambers, with cloths or towels for drying. Bathing was less frequent due to the effort required to heat water and the scarcity of large clean water quantities. When done, bathing often involved using large wooden tubs filled with warm water heated over a fire. Family members might bathe together to conserve water and fuel. Public bathhouses existed in some towns and cities. These establishments provided heated rooms and pools where people could wash and socialize. Bathhouses were supplied with water from wells, cisterns, or diverted streams and heated by wood or charcoal fires. Bathhouses varied in cleanliness and reputation, but many were important centers for hygiene and community interaction. Some offered massages, steam rooms, and treatments for ailments. The use of bathhouses peaked in certain regions, especially in warmer climates or where Roman traditions of bathing endured. Heating water for washing and bathing required considerable labor. Firewood was collected and stored carefully. Large cauldrons or pots were filled with water and placed over hearth fires to warm. Water had to be carried from the heat source to bathing tubs or washing basins. The effort involved meant that washing routines were often limited to once a week or less, with exceptions for illness or special occasions. Cold water washing was more common daily, especially for hands and faces. Water also played a role in cleaning household items. Floors were swept and then scrubbed with water and brushes or rags. Walls might be washed periodically to remove dirt and soot from fireplaces. Laundry washing was done in rivers or communal washhouses, but smaller washing tasks, such as rinsing kitchen utensils or wiping tables, used water brought from wells or streams. The quality of water was critical to health. People recognized that foul-smelling or cloudy water was unsafe, though the connection to disease was not fully understood. Contaminated water sources contributed to outbreaks of illness, especially cholera and dysentery. Efforts to protect water sources included regulations preventing the dumping of waste near wells and rivers. Some communities fenced off springs or placed protective covers over wells to reduce contamination. In some towns, water carriers supplied clean water to households unable to collect their own. These water vendors transported water in barrels or large containers, selling it for a small fee. Religious and cultural practices also influenced water use. Ritual washing was common in many faiths, including Christianity. Washing hands before prayer or entering a sacred space was a symbolic and practical act. Holy water, blessed by clergy, was used for purification rituals, sprinkling in homes and during church services. The sacred nature of water added layers of meaning beyond its physical use. Water scarcity and management shaped settlement patterns. Communities often developed where water was abundant and accessible. In dry or arid regions, rainwater harvesting and storage were vital. Droughts and water shortages posed serious challenges. Crop failures, livestock stress, and hygiene problems accompanied dry periods. People adapted by conserving water and adjusting routines. In castles and fortified estates, water supply was a critical factor in defense. Siege conditions required secure wells within walls or large cisterns to ensure continued access. The engineering of water systems in castles was sophisticated for the time. Cisterns collected rainwater from roofs, while wells were deep and protected. Channels and pipes sometimes carried water to kitchens, baths, and latrines. Water power was harnessed in some medieval communities through mills powered by rivers or streams. While primarily used for grinding grain, water mills reflect an understanding of managing water flow and infrastructure. Water was intertwined with daily life, health, work and spirituality in medieval times. The care taken in sourcing, storing, and using water demonstrates its vital importance. Despite the challenges and limitations, people developed effective methods to live with and manage water, ensuring survival and hygiene in a time before modern plumbing. Their relationship with water was practical and profound, shaping habits, technologies, and community life in ways still echoed today. In medieval times, the concept of personal cleanliness and hygiene extended beyond the home and into the wider environment. People understood, at least in practical terms, the connection between cleanliness and health, even if they did not have modern scientific knowledge. This awareness influenced how communities managed their surroundings, including streets, marketplaces, and public spaces. Medieval towns and villages were lively places filled with people, animals, merchants, and travelers. The everyday bustle generated significant waste, including food scraps, animal manure, and human refuse. Managing this waste was crucial to maintaining a functional and healthy environment. Streets were the primary public spaces where much of daily life unfolded. However, medieval streets were often narrow, unpaved, and shared by pedestrians, carts, horses, and livestock. This mix created a challenging environment for cleanliness. Animal waste was a major concern. Horses, essential for transportation and work, produced large amounts of manure that littered streets. Donkeys, pigs, and other domestic animals also contributed to the mess. Owners were expected to clean up after their animals, but enforcement was inconsistent, and manure accumulated quickly. Human waste disposal into streets was common, especially in towns lacking proper sewer systems. Chamber pots were emptied directly out of windows into gutters or onto the street. This practice created foul odors and unsanitary conditions. Town officials recognized these problems and sometimes issued ordinances requiring residents to clean the area in front of their homes. These rules might specify the removal of animal waste, garbage, and spilled liquids. Street cleaning was often carried out by hired workers or poorer residents, sometimes called scavengers or gong farmers. These individuals collected waste, swept streets, and removed refuse to designated dumping sites outside the town. Waste removal was typically done at night to avoid obstructing traffic and public life. This nocturnal work was unpleasant and poorly paid, but vital to public health. Many medieval towns had open drains or channels running along streets to carry rainwater and waste away. These drains were often clogged with debris and waste, reducing their effectiveness and leading to flooding and foul smells. Public latrines or communal toilets, where they existed, were usually located near marketplaces, bridges, or riverbanks. These facilities helped concentrate waste disposal, but required regular maintenance and cleaning. Waste disposal outside the town walls was another important aspect of sanitation. Garbage, human waste, and animal manure were dumped in pits, fields, or rivers beyond the populated areas. Some communities used midden heaps, large piles of household refuse, outside the town. These heaps accumulated organic waste, broken tools, pottery shards, and ashes. Over time, some middens were covered with soil and replaced by new ones, but they could still attract pests and create odors. The environmental impact of waste accumulation was significant. Polluted water sources contributed to the spread of disease, while noxious smells made living conditions unpleasant. Medieval authorities occasionally attempted to regulate waste disposal more strictly, passing laws to prevent dumping near wells, rivers, or roads. These regulations aimed to protect public health and water quality. Despite these efforts, enforcement was often difficult, especially in rapidly growing towns with limited resources. The lack of centralized waste management systems meant that sanitation varied widely between places. Markets were hubs of activity, but also centers of waste generation. Food vendors discarded spoiled produce and animal remains. Slaughterhouses produced offal and blood, which required disposal. Some towns designated specific areas for waste from markets and butchers. These were located away from residential zones to reduce odors and health risks. The smell of the marketplace could be overpowering, with a mixture of fresh goods, animal waste, and discarded refuse. People accepted this as part of urban life, but also sought ways to mitigate it through cleaning and organization. In monasteries and large estates, waste management was more organized. Monks and servants followed routines to remove refuse, maintain latrines, and clean communal spaces. Gardens and fields sometimes received human and animal waste as fertilizer, recycling nutrients to support agriculture. This practice, known as night soil application, was common despite the health risks. The use of manure and waste in farming reflects a practical understanding of resource reuse and soil enrichment. This recycling of waste helped sustain food production, but also required care to avoid contaminating water or crops. In addition to solid waste, medieval communities dealt with liquid waste from kitchens, tanneries, and other industries. These liquids often contained organic matter and chemicals that polluted waterways. Tanneries and dyers, essential trades for producing leather and textiles, generated wastewater with strong odors and harmful substances. These workshops were usually located outside residential areas to reduce nuisance. The management of industrial waste was primitive, and pollution of rivers and streams was common, affecting both people and livestock. The challenge of sanitation extended to air quality. The combination of smoke from fires, odors from waste and dust, created a difficult atmosphere, especially in crowded urban centers. Efforts to improve air quality included planting trees and hedges, maintaining open spaces, and regulating certain trades within city limits. Social attitudes towards cleanliness and waste were mixed. While people recognized the importance of hygiene, poverty, and lack of infrastructure limited options. The wealthy could afford better sanitation facilities, servants to manage waste, and access to cleaner water sources. Poorer residents often lived in cramped conditions with minimal sanitation, making them more vulnerable to illness. Public health was a growing concern, especially during epidemics. Outbreaks of plague, dysentery, and other diseases highlighted the dangers of poor sanitation. Some medieval medical texts linked foul smells and filth to sickness, promoting cleanliness as a preventive measure. Churches and religious institutions sometimes played a role in encouraging hygiene, promoting washing and proper waste disposal as moral duties. The combination of practical necessity and moral teaching shaped attitudes toward cleanliness in medieval society. Overall, waste management in medieval communities was a complex challenge with no easy solutions. The limited technology and infrastructure meant that many problems persisted. However, people adapted with a variety of strategies, laws, labor, communal facilities, and resource reuse to maintain a functional environment. The legacy of medieval sanitation practices is visible in the layout of old towns, place names referencing waste sites, and the gradual evolution of urban hygiene. Understanding how medieval people coped with waste offers insight into their daily lives, health, and community organization. It reminds us that even in times of scarcity and difficulty, efforts to maintain cleanliness and order were vital and continuous. In medieval times, dealing with human waste was an essential part of daily life, and over the centuries, people developed various methods and tools to manage it. The most common devices used indoors were chamber pots, simple containers kept close at hand to be used during the night or when going outside was inconvenient. These pots were typically made from pottery, pewter, or wood, varying in size and shape, but always practical. Families kept chamber pots under beds or in cupboards, often covered to contain odors. They were especially important during cold months, when venturing outdoors at night was uncomfortable or dangerous. Servants or family members would empty the pots regularly, usually in the morning, into designated waste areas such as cesspits, ditches, or the street gutters. In wealthier homes, chamber pots could be ornately decorated, made of fine ceramics or metals. However, their basic function remained the same. The design was usually a rounded vessel with a wide mouth, sometimes with handles for easy carrying. These pots were cleaned daily, and care was taken to avoid spills. For many, the chamber pot was an intimate household item, used primarily at night, but also during illness or when privacy was desired. The term close stool referred to a type of chamber pot disguised as a piece of furniture, a wooden box with a hinged lid and a chamber pot hidden inside. This allowed discreet use, keeping waste out of sight. When it came to disposing of the waste, the process depended greatly on location. In rural areas, waste was often emptied into nearby pits or midden heaps, sometimes dug outside the back door or garden. These waste pits were shallow holes used to collect household refuse, including human waste, food scraps, and broken objects. Once filled, they might be covered with soil and a new pit dug nearby. In towns and cities, the situation was more complicated. Streets were narrow and crowded, and proper waste disposal was a constant challenge. Many medieval towns had open drains or gutters running alongside streets to carry rainwater and waste away. Chamber pots were emptied directly into the street gutters, sometimes through small windows or openings known as garderobes, located above these drainage channels. This practice led to unsanitary conditions. Waste accumulated in streets and drains, attracting flies, rats, and foul odors. Officials periodically ordered streets to be cleaned, sometimes by scrubbing and hosing down with water, but often the task fell to poorer residents or laborers. Some towns enacted regulations requiring residents to dispose of waste responsibly, such as dumping it outside the city walls or in designated pits. Enforcement was irregular, and penalties were typically fines or public shaming. However, the general state of urban sanitation remained poor compared to modern standards. Privies or outdoor toilets were another common feature in medieval homes and communities. These were simple pits dug into the ground, often with wooden seats or benches built above. The pits collected human waste, which eventually decomposed or was emptied out. Privies were located at a distance from the main living quarters, usually in gardens or behind the house. They were constructed to minimize smell and contamination of water sources, although this was not always achieved successfully. In castles and monasteries, more sophisticated privies were developed. These sometimes included stone or wooden seats built over deep shafts or garderobes, which allowed waste to drop into a moat, cesspit, or pit below. Waste disposal systems in castles might use a chute or shaft directing refuse away from living spaces. The garderobes was a specific type of medieval toilet found in castles and larger buildings. It consisted of a small room or closet built on the outer wall, with a seat positioned over a vertical shaft. Waste dropped through the shaft into the moat, or a cesspit below. The flowing water in moats helped carry away the waste, though sometimes it caused foul smells. The design of garderobes was pragmatic, intended to remove waste from inhabited areas efficiently. However, they required maintenance to prevent blockages and foul conditions. Servants or designated workers were responsible for cleaning and emptying cesspits and removing waste from privies. The depth of cesspits varied, with some being shallow and others quite deep. These pits collected not only human waste but also household garbage. When filled, pits were emptied manually, often at night to avoid public scrutiny. The waste was sometimes transported outside the town walls and dumped. In addition to privies and chamber pots, public latrines existed in some medieval towns and monastic complexes. These facilities were communal toilets, often built over running water, such as a stream or river, to aid waste removal. Public latrines were rudimentary, but effective for their time, providing a place for many people to relieve themselves in one location. Monasteries often featured the most advanced sanitation systems of the period. They had latrines connected to running water channels, ensuring constant flushing. These latrines were long benches with holes spaced apart, allowing several monks to use the facility simultaneously. Waste dropped into water channels below, which carried it away. Water flow in monastic latrines was created by diverting streams or collecting rainwater in cisterns. The maintenance of these systems was critical to prevent blockages and smells. Monks or servants cleaned latrines regularly, using brushes and water. The existence of public and communal latrines reflects an understanding of the importance of managing waste for health and hygiene. While these facilities were basic, they represented a step towards organized sanitation. The social and cultural attitudes towards waste and its disposal were complex. Waste was seen both as a natural part of life and something to be hidden or controlled. People were aware of the dangers of contamination and foul smells, but lacked the scientific knowledge we have today. Medieval cities struggled with overcrowding, which made sanitation difficult. Narrow streets and tightly packed houses left little room for waste pits or proper drainage. The accumulation of waste contributed to the spread of disease, particularly during outbreaks of plague and other illnesses. Efforts to improve sanitation included the establishment of ordinances regulating waste disposal and street cleaning. Some towns hired workers known as gong farmers or night soil collectors to remove human waste from cesspits and privies. These workers carried waste in buckets or carts, dumping it outside city limits. Despite the unpleasant nature of their work, gong farmers played a vital role in maintaining urban hygiene. Their labor helped prevent waste buildup that could cause health hazards. The disposal of animal waste such as manure from horses and livestock was also a significant concern. Streets were often littered with manure which combined with human waste created difficult living conditions. Some cities attempted to regulate the movement of animals within town limits or required owners to clean up after them. Manure was sometimes collected for use as fertilizer in fields outside the city. Waste management extended beyond human excrement to other refuse, including food scraps, broken household items and industrial waste. All these materials contributed to the waste piles found outside many medieval settlements. The knowledge of sanitation was often empirical rather than scientific. People noticed that waste attracted flies and caused bad smells, and they understood that foul air could lead to illness. This led to practices such as covering waste pits with straw or earth, using ash to reduce odor, and keeping living spaces separated from waste areas. In homes, hearth ash was commonly sprinkled into chamber pots or privies to absorb moisture and mask odors. Ash was also mixed with other waste materials to reduce smell and aid decomposition. Some medieval texts and medical writings advised on the importance of cleanliness and waste management. While these were not always followed universally, they reflect awareness among educated classes. As towns grew larger and populations increased, waste management became an ongoing challenge. The limitations of medieval infrastructure meant that many settlements struggled to keep streets clean and air fresh. In castles and noble estates, sanitation was better managed. Dedicated servants cleaned privies and cesspits, and waste disposal was more organized. Wealth and space allowed for improved facilities, including stone privies and waste pits with covers. Despite these advances, medieval sanitation was primitive by modern standards. The risk of contamination of water sources and the spread of disease was ever present. This reality shaped how people lived, worked and arranged their homes. In rural villages, the challenges were different but still significant. Waste pits and privies were dug outside the home, often near the garden or field. While space was less limited, concerns about contaminating wells and water supplies remained. Villagers relied on natural processes to break down waste over time. The use of earth, straw and ash helped manage smells and accelerated decomposition. Some communities rotated waste pits or moved them periodically to maintain hygiene. The management of waste in medieval times was thus a balance of practical solutions, environmental awareness and social norms. It was labor-intensive and often unpleasant but necessary for daily life. Understanding this aspect of medieval living helps explain many features of town planning, household design and social organization. The evolution of sanitation continued slowly over the centuries. Innovations such as improved plumbing, dedicated sewer systems and public health regulations eventually transformed waste management, but these were developments for later times. In the medieval period, the combination of chamber pots, privies, cesspits and rudimentary latrines formed the backbone of human waste management. People adapted to the realities of their environment and technology, developing methods that, while imperfect, allowed communities to function and grow. This system, centered on containment, manual disposal, and basic infrastructure, was a key part of daily life, influencing everything from household routines to urban planning. Despite the challenges and discomforts, medieval people lived with these sanitation methods as a normal part of life, just as they managed other aspects of their environment with care and resourcefulness. The management of human waste in medieval times was a constant concern, shaping behaviors, architecture, and social roles in ways often overlooked but deeply significant. It reveals a practical mindset, adapting to limitations while seeking solutions within available means. Through chamber pots, privies, cesspits and communal latrines, medieval society maintained a level of hygiene that, while rudimentary, laid groundwork for future improvements. This aspect of history offers insight into the daily lives of people long ago, connecting us to their world and their ways of meeting essential human needs. In medieval times, the need to manage human waste extended beyond individual households to the communal and civic level, especially in growing towns and cities. As populations increased, so did the challenges of sanitation, prompting the development of organized systems for waste collection, removal, and disposal. Town authorities recognized that poor sanitation could lead to outbreaks of disease, foul odors, and general disorder. Consequently, many towns established regulations and roles dedicated to keeping streets, drains, and public areas clean. One key figure in medieval sanitation was the night soil collector, sometimes called the gong farmer in England or the nightman elsewhere. These workers were responsible for emptying cesspits, privies, and latrines, often during the night, to avoid disturbing the public. Though the job was unpleasant and associated with low social status, it was indispensable. Night soil collectors used buckets, shovels, and carts to remove waste from pits and transport it outside the town walls. The collected waste, commonly called night soil, was often sold or given to farmers as fertilizer. This recycling of human waste into agricultural production was a practical way to enrich soils and improve crop yields, despite the health risks involved. Disposal sites were typically located on the outskirts of towns, away from wells, homes, and marketplaces. These dumping grounds were carefully managed to avoid contaminating water sources or creating breeding grounds for pests. In some cases, waste was composted or mixed with other organic materials before being spread on fields. Medieval towns also developed basic sewer systems, though they varied widely in design and effectiveness. Early sewers were often open channels running along the sides of streets, called gutters or rills. These channels carried rainwater, household wastewater, and sometimes human waste away from the streets toward nearby rivers or ponds. Covered sewers, stone or wooden tunnels beneath streets, existed in some larger towns and cities. These were more effective at controlling odors and preventing waste from contaminating the environment. Construction and maintenance of sewers required significant labor and resources. Towns appointed officials or guilds to oversee sanitation infrastructure, enforce cleanliness laws, and organize cleaning crews. Regular cleaning of streets and drains was essential to prevent blockages and overflow. Workers swept streets, cleared debris from gutters, and repaired damaged sewer sections. Despite these efforts, sewers were far from perfect. Blockages from waste, fallen debris, and animal remains were common, leading to floods and foul smells. Overflowing sewers often spilled waste into streets or waterways, posing health hazards. To address this, some towns implemented ordinances banning the dumping of waste directly into streets or rivers. Fines and penalties were imposed on those who violated these rules, though enforcement varied. In market areas, waste management was particularly important. Markets generated large amounts of refuse, including spoiled food, animal offal, and packaging materials. Market authorities designated specific dumping areas and organized regular cleaning to prevent accumulation. Public latrines were sometimes built near markets to provide convenient facilities for merchants and shoppers. These latrines helped concentrate waste disposal and reduce street fouling. In some cases, public toilets were designed with multiple seats and connected to cesspits or sewer systems. Bathhouses and public washing facilities also played a role in urban hygiene. These establishments required clean water supply and effective waste removal. The presence of bathhouses contributed to communal cleanliness and social life, but also demanded careful sanitation management. Water sources in towns were vulnerable to contamination from waste. Wells and springs could become polluted if located near cesspits or waste dumps. Town authorities monitored water quality to the extent possible, relocating wells or enforcing protective measures when contamination was detected. Rainwater harvesting was used to supplement water supply and reduce pressure on wells. Residents collected rainwater from roofs into cisterns or barrels for household use, including washing and cleaning. The social aspect of sanitation was significant. Cleanliness was associated with moral virtue, civility, and social order. Uncleanliness was often stigmatized, linked to poverty, laziness, or immorality. Town ordinances reflected these attitudes, demanding that residents keep their properties and surroundings tidy. Guilds, religious organizations, and civic groups sometimes organized cleaning campaigns or promoted hygiene education. The church encouraged cleanliness as part of spiritual discipline, associating physical purity with moral health. During epidemics such as the Black Death, concerns about sanitation intensified. Efforts to improve waste removal and reduce overcrowding were implemented to limit disease spread. Quarantines, cleaning of public spaces, and disposal of infected materials became priorities. Though medieval sanitation systems were rudimentary compared to modern standards, they represented important steps in managing urban waste. The combination of regulations, labor, infrastructure, and cultural attitudes helped towns function despite the challenges. These developments laid the groundwork for later advances in sanitation and public health. They also illustrate how medieval societies balanced practical necessity with social and moral values. Understanding medieval waste management reveals the complexity and importance of sanitation in daily life. It shows how communities adapted to growing populations and environmental constraints. It also highlights the ongoing human effort to create healthier, cleaner living conditions. Medieval towns and cities, growing hubs of commerce and daily life, faced a pressing challenge: managing waste in a way that would keep their streets livable and their people healthy. The problem was complicated by the fact that many towns lacked comprehensive sewer systems or organized waste collection. Instead, they relied on a patchwork of customs, ordinances, and the work of dedicated, but often socially marginalized, laborers to keep human waste and refuse at bay. At the heart of medieval urban sanitation were the street gutters and open drains. These narrow channels ran along the sides of many town streets, designed to carry away rainwater, kitchen wastewater, and sometimes even liquid waste from latrines or chamber pots. The gutters were essential in preventing the pooling of stagnant water, which could breed disease-carrying insects and contribute to foul odors. However, these open drains also became receptacles for much of the town's waste, often mixing human and animal refuse with household garbage. Cleaning these gutters was a tedious but necessary job, frequently undertaken by the poorest residents or hired laborers. Town ordinances sometimes required property owners to keep the gutters in front of their homes clear of debris and animal dung. However, enforcement was uneven, and in crowded urban areas, the gutters could quickly fill with waste and overflow, spreading filth into the streets. One of the biggest sanitation issues was the disposal of human waste. Chamber pots were widely used in medieval homes, especially at night or during cold weather, when outdoor privies were impractical. These vessels, often made of ceramic or metal, collected urine and feces and were typically emptied into gutters or privy pits. The practice of throwing chamber pot contents into the street, while common, was a source of persistent complaints and a public health hazard. Town officials sought to regulate this behavior with fines and prohibitions, but enforcement faced obstacles. The narrow streets and lack of organized waste collection made it difficult to keep up with the volume of waste produced daily. People's habits, the lack of alternatives, and the sheer density of urban populations meant that streets were often filthy. Privies or outdoor toilets varied considerably in design and location. In wealthier homes or public buildings, privies might be small enclosed structures built over pits or connected to rudimentary sewer channels. These latrines often had stone or wooden seats, and sometimes roofs and walls for privacy. In poorer neighborhoods, privies could be simple holes in the ground, offering little in the way of comfort or sanitation. The location of privies was crucial to their function and to public health. Ideally, they were placed away from wells and water sources to prevent contamination. In some towns, privies were built projecting from castle walls or monastery towers, allowing waste to drop directly into moats or cesspools below. This design helped isolate waste but required regular maintenance and cleaning. The role of the gong farmer, or night soil collector, was essential in managing human waste. These workers specialized in emptying cesspits and latrines, typically under cover of darkness. The job was difficult and unpleasant, involving shoveling out waste, carrying it in buckets or carts, and disposing of it outside the town. Despite the social stigma attached to this work, it was vital to public health and cleanliness. The waste collected by gong farmers was often sold to farmers as fertilizer, reflecting a practical understanding of recycling resources. Human waste, rich in nutrients, helped improve soil fertility and agricultural yields. However, the use of night soil carried health risks, especially when applied improperly or close to water sources. Waste disposal sites were usually located on the outskirts of towns, beyond the city walls. These areas were chosen to minimize the impact of odors and to protect water supplies. Waste might be dumped in pits, spread over fields, or composted with other organic materials. Despite these measures, medieval towns struggled with sanitation problems. Waste accumulation, blocked drains, and overflowing privies led to foul odors and unsanitary conditions. Flies and vermin thrived in these environments, spreading disease and discomfort. During outbreaks of plague and other epidemics, the connection between filth and illness became more apparent. Towns responded by increasing cleaning efforts, improving regulations, and sometimes closing public spaces to limit contagion. Public latrines and communal toilets were an important feature in some medieval towns. Built near marketplaces, bridges, or busy streets, these facilities served multiple users and helped centralize waste disposal. Their construction ranged from simple wooden structures with bench seats to more durable stone buildings with multiple holes arranged in rows. Some public latrines featured running water or were connected to sewers that drained into rivers. Maintenance was a constant concern, requiring regular cleaning and repairs to prevent blockages and reduce odors. Bathhouses, although more common in earlier medieval periods, also played a role in urban sanitation. These establishments offered communal bathing and washing facilities, contributing to personal cleanliness and social interaction. Bathhouses required reliable water supplies and waste removal, and their decline in some regions was influenced by changing cultural attitudes as well as sanitation concerns. Water management was another critical aspect of medieval sanitation. Wells, springs, and rivers provided drinking water, but contamination by waste was a persistent risk. Towns tried to protect water sources by locating latrines and waste dumps away from wells and by regulating activities near water. Rainwater harvesting helped supplement water supplies. Residents collected rainwater from roofs into cisterns or barrels for household use, including washing and cooking. In addition to human waste, towns generated significant quantities of other refuse, food scraps, broken pottery, ashes, and industrial waste from tanneries and dye works. Disposal of this refuse often involved dumping in designated areas or burning. Marketplaces were hotspots for refuse accumulation. Vendors discarded spoiled produce, animal bones, and other waste, which required regular removal to prevent odors and pests. The social dimension of sanitation was significant. Cleanliness was tied to notions of civility, health, and moral order. Town ordinances often reflected these values, mandating that residents keep their property and surrounding streets clean. Guilds and religious institutions sometimes promoted hygiene, organizing cleaning days or educating citizens about sanitation. Despite all efforts, medieval sanitation remained imperfect. Crowded living conditions, limited technology, and growing populations challenged the capacity to maintain cleanliness. Nevertheless, the developments in waste management, sewer construction, and public hygiene during this period laid important groundwork for future improvements. The daily struggle to keep towns clean and healthy reveals the ingenuity and determination of medieval communities. It also reminds us that sanitation has long been a critical factor in human well-being, requiring cooperation, infrastructure, and social will. The medieval experience with sanitation offers valuable insights into the relationship between environment, health, and society. Medieval hygiene and sanitation were closely intertwined with everyday life, shaped by practical needs, cultural values, and available resources. The absence of modern plumbing meant that people had to be resourceful in managing personal cleanliness and waste disposal. While we often imagine medieval towns as dirty and smelly places, the reality was more nuanced, with communities developing a variety of solutions adapted to their circumstances. One of the most common methods for cleansing after using the privy was the use of water. In many regions, water was plentiful enough that people washed themselves with it, using their hands or small containers called lavatories to pour water. This practice was widespread in southern Europe and parts of the Mediterranean, where water sources were accessible and cultural traditions emphasized washing. In northern Europe, where water was sometimes scarcer or colder, alternative materials were frequently used for personal cleansing. Soft mosses, leaves, hay, or straw served as absorbent, gentle materials to wipe oneself. The choice of cleansing material depended on what nature and environment provided, as well as on social status and personal preference. For those who could afford it, cloths made of linen or wool were sometimes used. These cloths could be washed and reused, making them more economical and environmentally friendly. The use of cloths, however, raised concerns about hygiene, since inadequate washing could lead to the spread of germs and infection. In some Mediterranean regions, a sponge on a stick was used for cleansing. This device was rinsed in a basin of water between uses and shared among family members, or even in public latrines. While effective, this method carried risks of contamination if the sponges were not properly cleaned. Beyond cleansing materials, washing and bathing practices were an important aspect of medieval hygiene. Bathhouses, common in many medieval towns and cities, provided facilities for communal bathing and personal care. These establishments were centers of social life, as well as cleanliness. Bathhouses often featured large tubs or pools filled with heated water, supplied by nearby springs, wells, or rainwater collection. Bathers would soak, wash, and sometimes massage or exfoliate the skin. Soap made from animal fats and lye was available, but could be harsh and was not universally used. Bathhouses required effective waste removal and fresh water supply, which in turn encouraged investment in local infrastructure. They were especially prevalent in regions influenced by Roman and Islamic traditions, where public bathing was culturally important. However, in some northern European regions and later medieval periods, attitudes toward communal bathing shifted. Religious concerns about modesty and fears of spreading disease led to a decline in bathhouse use. People then focused more on washing hands and faces or cleaning themselves at home. Soap making in medieval times was a skilled craft. Soap was produced from animal fats such as tallow combined with alkaline substances like ashes or plant ashes. The resulting soap was often coarse and could irritate the skin, limiting its use. Soap was mostly employed for washing clothes or household cleaning, rather than personal hygiene, although wealthier individuals might use finer soaps for bathing. Laundry was an important household task, especially in towns. Clothes were washed in rivers, streams, or specially designated washing areas. Soap or fuller's earth, a type of clay with cleansing properties, was used to remove dirt and grease. The laundering process was labor-intensive, involving soaking, scrubbing, beating, and rinsing garments. Clean clothes were a mark of status and hygiene, with many households owning only a few sets of garments. Hand washing was recognized as a critical hygiene practice. Before meals, after using the latrine, and at religious ceremonies, washing hands was encouraged. The use of basins with fresh water, sometimes scented with herbs, helped remove dirt and reduce the spread of disease. Herbs and flowers played an important role in medieval hygiene, particularly in masking unpleasant odors. People placed bunches of lavender, rosemary, mint, or other fragrant plants in homes, latrines, and clothes chests. These aromatic herbs not only improved smells, but were also believed to have protective or medicinal properties. In latrines and privies, ashes or lime were commonly sprinkled over waste to absorb moisture and odors. This practice helped keep facilities more bearable and discouraged flies and vermin. The smell of latrines and waste was still a problem, however, especially in crowded urban areas. People coped by burning herbs or incense, hanging scented cloths, or using perfumed pomanders. Children's hygiene was another important aspect of medieval life. Infants were often swaddled tightly in cloths and diapers, which were changed frequently and washed. Caregivers used soft materials such as moss or wool for cleaning babies. Proper care was essential to prevent infections and ensure health. For the elderly and infirm, hygiene could be challenging. Family members or servants assisted with washing and toileting, and special arrangements were sometimes made to accommodate limited mobility. Religious beliefs strongly influenced medieval views on cleanliness and hygiene. Cleanliness was often associated with spiritual purity and moral virtue. Many religious texts and monastic rules emphasized washing hands before prayer and maintaining a clean body. Monastic communities were notable for their structured hygiene practices. Monks and nuns followed strict routines for washing, bathing, and laundering, guided by rules intended to support health and spiritual discipline. Pilgrimage and travel presented unique hygiene challenges. Pilgrims journeying to holy sites had to manage personal cleanliness with limited resources and uncertain access to clean water. Inns, hostels, and monasteries along pilgrimage routes sometimes provided bathing facilities or latrines, though standards varied. Travelers often carried their own cleansing materials, such as cloths or water vessels, and relied on natural features like rivers or streams. Sanitation and hygiene were matters not only of health, but also of social perception. Cleanliness was linked to social status, respectability, and civility. Dirtiness was associated with poverty, neglect, or moral failing. Consequently, individuals and families took pride in maintaining their homes and bodies as clean as possible. Despite limitations, medieval people developed practical and culturally meaningful hygiene habits adapted to their environment. While lacking modern conveniences, their efforts helped control disease, reduce discomfort, and support social order. The history of medieval hygiene and sanitation reveals human adaptability and the deep connections between body, environment, and community. Medieval kitchens and dining practices played an important role in the cycle of cleanliness and waste management. Cooking and eating generated considerable waste, from food scraps and animal bones to ashes from hearth fires. The way these leftovers were handled had a direct impact on sanitation in homes and towns. In wealthier households, kitchens were often separate rooms or even separate buildings, designed to contain smoke, heat, and odors. The hearth was the heart of the kitchen, where fires were maintained day and night for cooking, heating water, and sometimes boiling water for cleaning utensils. Cooking involved roasting meats on spits, boiling stews, baking bread in ovens, and preparing vegetables and dairy products. These processes produced waste like bones, peelings, fat, and spoiled food. Disposal of kitchen waste varied. Some scraps were fed to domestic animals, such as pigs or chickens, creating a form of recycling within the household economy. Bones might be crushed or discarded into pits or middens, designated waste heaps behind the house. Ashes from the fire were not simply discarded. They were collected and used for various household purposes, as a cleaning agent to scour pots, as an ingredient in soap making, and even to deter pests in the garden. Middens were carefully managed piles of domestic refuse, often located a short distance from the dwelling. Over time, these heaps grew large, and their contents decomposed or were scavenged by animals. In towns, communal refuse heaps were common outside city walls, where waste from many households accumulated. These sites could be unpleasant and a source of vermin, but were necessary given the lack of organized garbage collection. Marketplaces were significant sources of organic waste. Vendors discarded spoiled or unsold produce, animal offal, and packaging materials, such as straw or rushes. Market authorities often imposed regulations to control where and how waste was disposed of, sometimes designating specific dumping grounds. In some cases, markets included large pits or covered areas for waste collection, which were emptied regularly by town workers. Certain trades and industries produced particular sanitation challenges. Tanneries, which processed animal hides using chemicals and waste products, generated strong odors and polluted watercourses. Leather workers and dyers sometimes set up their workshops on the edges of towns or near rivers to manage the environmental impact. The disposal of industrial waste required regulation to prevent contamination of drinking water and surrounding land. Household cleaning was an ongoing task. Sweeping floors, washing dishes, and cleaning cooking implements all involved the use of water, ashes, sand, or herbs. Utensils were often made of wood, pottery, or metal. Wooden bowls and spoons were scrubbed with water and sand, while metal cookware might be polished with ashes. Keeping living spaces free of dirt and pests was essential for comfort and health. Animal waste posed another sanitation challenge. Many households kept livestock like pigs, chickens, or goats close to their homes. Animal droppings contributed to street fouling and attracted flies and rats. Town ordinances frequently regulated the keeping of animals within city limits, specifying where they could be kept and how their waste should be managed. Some towns employed swineherds who roamed the streets with pigs, feeding them on food scraps and cleaning up refuse. This system was a practical way to reduce waste, but also carried risks of disease transmission. Vermin control was a constant concern. Rats, mice, flies, and other pests thrived in the unsanitary conditions of medieval towns. Flies in particular were associated with spreading diseases, leading people to take measures such as hanging herbs or using smoke to repel them. Cats and dogs were kept not only as companions, but also as natural pest controllers. Pest control efforts extended to water sources. Towns attempted to protect wells from contamination by covering them and regulating nearby activities. Contamination of drinking water by waste was a common cause of illness, making well maintenance a priority. Toilet facilities in public spaces, markets, and religious institutions needed regular attention. Monasteries often had advanced sanitation systems compared to towns. They built covered latrines with running water or cesspits that were cleaned regularly. Monastic communities emphasized cleanliness both for health and spiritual reasons, maintaining strict rules for hygiene. Hospitals and almshouses in medieval towns also faced sanitation challenges. Caring for the sick required clean water, waste disposal, and infection control measures, though these were primitive by modern standards. Some hospitals had small gardens or waste pits separated from living quarters to reduce contamination. The medieval urban environment was shaped by these sanitation concerns, with regulations, infrastructure, and community practices evolving over time. Street cleaning, waste removal, and water management required cooperation among residents, tradespeople, and officials. While conditions varied widely, the shared efforts to manage waste reflect a deep awareness of the importance of sanitation. Despite the many difficulties, medieval towns strived to maintain cleanliness to support health, commerce, and social order. The ongoing struggle with sanitation highlights the complex relationship between human settlement, environment, and well-being. Let me know when you want the final part. In medieval times, the issue of personal hygiene and sanitation extended far beyond the private sphere. Public health was a communal concern, especially as towns and cities expanded rapidly, bringing together dense populations in confined spaces. The absence of modern plumbing and sewage systems meant that medieval people had to develop creative ways to keep their environment as clean and healthy as possible, even under challenging conditions. One notable aspect was the use of public latrines. These communal toilets were often located near marketplaces, bridges, or busy streets where many people gathered. Designed to serve multiple users simultaneously, they ranged from simple wooden structures with bench seats to more elaborate stone buildings with rows of holes. Some public latrines were connected to primitive sewer channels or cesspits, helping to manage waste more effectively than open dumping. Maintenance of these facilities was essential to prevent the spread of disease and reduce unpleasant odors. Town officials or designated workers cleaned the latrines regularly, removing waste and applying substances like ashes or lime to absorb moisture and odors. Despite these efforts, public latrines were often viewed with suspicion or disdain due to their association with filth and disease. Another public sanitation feature was the network of gutters and drains running along streets. These channels carried rainwater, wastewater from homes, and sometimes even liquid waste from chamber pots. While useful in preventing water from pooling in streets, the open gutters could quickly become clogged with solid waste and debris, turning into breeding grounds for flies and rodents. But the public sanitation feature was the network of gutters and drains running along streets. To combat this, many towns issued ordinances requiring property owners to clean the gutters in front of their homes. Sweeping streets and clearing drains became part of civic responsibility, although enforcement varied widely. Towns also appointed officials or guilds to oversee street cleaning and waste removal, organizing laborers to maintain urban cleanliness. Waste disposal outside of town walls was common practice. Night soil collectors, known as gong farmers in England or nightmen elsewhere, were hired to empty cesspits and latrines, transporting human waste to designated dumping grounds or fields where it was used as fertilizer. This recycling of waste was an early form of nutrient management, benefiting agriculture, but posing health risks if not handled carefully. Water supply was another critical factor in medieval sanitation. Wells and springs provided drinking water, but contamination from nearby waste pits or cesspits was a constant threat. Towns tried to protect water sources by regulating the placement of latrines and waste dumps, and by enforcing rules against throwing waste into rivers or wells. Rainwater harvesting supplemented water supplies, with residents collecting rain from roofs into cisterns or barrels. This water was used for washing, cooking, and other household needs, reducing pressure on wells. Personal hygiene practices reflected both practical needs and cultural beliefs. Bathing was common in earlier medieval periods, especially in warmer climates or among wealthier classes. Public bathhouses offered communal facilities for washing and socializing, supplied with heated water and equipped with drainage systems. Soap making was a skilled craft, producing soaps from animal fats and alkaline ashes. Though often harsh on the skin, soap was used for laundering clothes and household cleaning, and by some for personal hygiene. As the medieval period progressed, attitudes toward bathing shifted in certain regions due to religious concerns about modesty and fears of disease. People increasingly favored washing hands and faces over full-body bathing. Clothing hygiene was important, with laundering conducted in rivers or special washing areas using soap or fuller's earth to remove dirt and grease. Clean garments were a marker of status and respectability. Household cleaning involved sweeping floors, washing dishes, and managing animal waste. Livestock kept close to homes contributed to street fouling and pest problems, leading to regulations controlling animal keeping within towns. Pest control was an ongoing concern. Rats, mice, flies, and other vermin thrived in unsanitary conditions, spreading disease and discomfort. People used herbs, smoke, and animals like cats and dogs to deter pests. Religious institutions played a significant role in promoting hygiene. Monasteries maintained strict rules for cleanliness, with regular washing, laundering, and waste management. Hospitals and almshouses also faced sanitation challenges, caring for the sick under difficult conditions. The medieval experience with sanitation and hygiene reveals a complex interplay of environment, culture, and technology. Despite lacking modern conveniences, communities developed practical solutions to manage waste, protect water, and maintain personal cleanliness. These efforts laid the groundwork for later advances in public health and sanitation infrastructure. That completes the 10 parts of this story. Would you like me to compile or adjust anything, or create something else next? As we drift through the rhythms of medieval life, it's clear that people long ago faced many of the same everyday challenges we do now. How to stay clean, how to manage waste, and how to live comfortably alongside neighbors in bustling towns and quiet villages alike. Though their tools were simple and their systems imperfect by today's standards, the ingenuity and care with which they approached hygiene and sanitation reveal a deep understanding of human needs and community well-being. From the mosses and leaves used for cleansing to the dedicated workers quietly emptying cesspits under cover of night, from the fragrant herbs hanging in windows to the bustling bathhouses where townsfolk gathered, medieval people created practices and traditions that balanced practicality with culture, health with modesty. Their world may have lacked modern plumbing, running water, and sanitation engineering, but it was far from careless. Instead, it was a world where everyone from the highest lord to the humblest laborer played a part in keeping their homes and streets as clean and safe as possible. As you settle deeper into rest, imagine the quiet streets of a medieval town at dusk, the gentle sound of water running in a gutter, the faint scent of lavender from a nearby garden, and the soft rustle of linen washing on a clothesline. These small, everyday details connect us across time, reminding us that no matter the century, care for cleanliness and health is a timeless part of human life. Sleep well, and whenever you're ready, I'm here to take you on another calm journey through history.